I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been seeing those vintage style slip dresses everywhere. They've got that gathered bust, thick straps, and then that beautiful like flowy bias finish. So I thought I'd try give it a go of making my own, and this is how it turned out. Welcome back to the Essentials Club. If you're new around here, I am Maddie. On this channel, I'm on a journey of making my dream wardrobe. I share what works for me, and then if you want to follow along, I also share all the steps so you can make your own garments as well. The thing I love about this dress the most is that I ended up making it out of 2 different fabrics, and I feel like the different finishes of fabrics gave it a whole different style and look to it. So one was made out of like a satin finish, and it just has this elegant feel to it, which would be perfect to style up whether I'm like going out for dinner or something like that. And then the second one I did like a cotton longer style, and I feel like it has a bit more of like casual vibe to it. I wear it to the markets, out to a cafe. The longer style casual dress I could wear for like the first half of the day, and then the satin style I could wear for the second half of the day. I'm so happy with how both of these turned out, and I'm honestly so excited to have these essentials added into my wardrobe. I feel like they'll be perfect go-tos in the upcoming warmer months. Well, anyway, if you want to add something similar to your wardrobe, this is what you'll need to create your own beautiful dress. I'll put the suggested amount of material that you'll need in the description box of this video. I think for the best fit, I would recommend a lightweight kind of material. This style, I ended up using an old bed sheet, which I'm pretty sure was just pure cotton, and then also like a satin finish fabric, because I felt both of them would just have a nice flowy fit to them. Just because if it's lightweight, then it will probably sit better on your body and also just have a nicer flow to it. Once you've got that, you'll then need some fabric scissors, some matching thread to your material, a measuring tape, some pins, something long and clean like a paintbrush or something similar, and then you'll need a shirt to reference, ideally something that fits you a bit looser. Otherwise, if it is a tighter fit, we can always add seam allowance where need be. And then lastly, we'll need our trusty old sewing machine. But before we jump into the steps of making these dresses, I just want to say a massive thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. If you haven't heard of Skillshare before, they're an incredible online resource with a growing community of eager learners and teachers. Through their platform, you'll find thousands of inspiring classes for curious and creative people just like yourselves, where you can explore new skills, develop existing interests, or just get lost in creativity. Lately, I've been really enjoying Denise's class on the basics of sewing, and I know what you're thinking. Yes, you're watching a video of me showing you how to sew, but personally, I feel if I want to keep evolving with this craft, I shouldn't just think that I know everything. I'm so open to learning new things. That's why I'm always looking out for new pieces to learn from. And Denise shares some interesting tips on how to finish garments, fabric shopping, and it's just fun to watch someone who shares the same passion as you as well. If this sounds like something you would be interested in, then definitely jump on the offer below, where the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Thanks again to Skillshare, and now time to jump into making these dresses. As this is a self-drafting process, we just need to find some key measurements from our body that we will be working with to create the panels for the dress. For the length of the dress, start around your front mid-bust area and measure down to the point where you would like it to finish. Obviously, you can go for a mini, a midi, whatever suits your style. I did end up creating both lengths just because I wanted one of each. Once you found that, then add 2 inches for seam allowance. Then we'll wrap the measuring tape just around our lower bust area, or pretty much in line with where the bottom of your bra might sit. Once you found that, then add 2 inches of seam allowance and divide this by 2, and this is going to be the cutting width at the top of our panel because we want it to hug it in around our waist / like lower bust area. Measure around like your butt or hip area, wherever you find to be the widest, and then we'll add 4 inches onto this measurement and divide this by 2, and that is going to indicate our bottom width of the panel, as we want it to hug in around our top area and then flow out from there, allowing for our widest point. Then we need to figure out some dimensions for these top panels, so start around your mid bust area, around your side area where the front and the back will meet. If you're wearing something and it has a side seam, that's probably a good indication of where they'll meet. And then we'll add 1 inch of seam allowance to this measurement. Then for the height of this panel that will be for our top section, we are going to measure from the top of our shoulder again down to that lower bust, or just under our kind of bra section area. And for this, we will add 2 inches of seam allowance. Now that we have those measurements, we will grab our material, set up our sewing area, and then we are ready to start making. So for these bottom panels, we're going to cut them out on the bias, and here's a little explanation of why. If you're unsure about the benefits or the difference of cutting on the bias, I will show you an example. So this has been cut on the bias, and as you can see when I pull it, it's got that really nice like drape to it. So when it falls on your body, it hugs it nicely and then it just has a nice flowy effect to it. Obviously this is not a straight piece, it is an offcut, but if I hold it in line with the selvage or the grain of the fabric, see how if I pull it, it doesn't do anything like that other fabric did, it just stays straight. So therefore it's going to be a bit boxy compared to the nice flowy bias cut. I hope that little side note helps. Now if you're completely unfamiliar with cutting on the bias, essentially all it means is that we are cutting on a 45-degree angle on the material. So how we find this 45-degree angle, if you have a tool that indicates a 45-degree angle, you can go ahead and use that. Otherwise, we'll fold the corner of the material over so that the edges are parallel with the existing straight edges. And this will just help create right angles in all of the corners, indicating that we have found the 45-degree angle. Then from there, you can just draw out some lines to help you remember where the 45-degree angle is. Another way, if that doesn't seem to work for you, you can just measure from the corner an equal amount on each side, draw a line between there, and that will help find your 45-degree angle. Okay, so now that we have that all sorted, we will then start plotting out our key measurements for these bottom sections. With this silky material, I just find it to be so flimsy, so I just cut out a straight rectangle, which was the equation that we found for the widest point, and then for the length of the panel, that was obviously the length that we found for the dress plus the seam allowance. And then figured out which section I wanted to be the top, measured it in the amount to find that smaller width, and then cut those angles off. Also throughout this, you'll probably see in the beginning stages, I do switch between filming the satin material and my cotton bed sheet. I think I ended up finding it was just easier to film the cotton one. Once you've cut out that first panel, we'll then need to cut out a second panel for the back side. Now you can use this first one as a template and lay it down on your material. Just make sure that you do lay it on that 45-degree angle and cut it on the bias again. And ideally lay down your material so that they are good sides facing and therefore they are a mirrored version of each other. Righto, that means we should have our two bottom panels all ready to go. Now it's time to prepare the top panels. So we're going to cut out one rectangle, which is that half front bust area plus the seam allowance for the width, and then the height is that amount that we found from the shoulder down to the bottom of our bust area. Once you've got that cut out, we can then grab our reference shirt and tuck away the sleeves to find the shape of the armhole. Make sure to offset it from the sides by about half an inch just so that allows for seam allowance later on, and then we'll just trace around the shape of this sleeve. This shirt for me personally is a little bit tighter around the armhole compared to what I want the dress to be, so I just made sure to make armholes a little bit bigger. From that armhole line, we are going to then measure how wide we want the top of the strap to be. So whatever you want it to end up being, add at least 1 inch to that so there is enough seam allowance for when we sew it together. I wanted mine to be a bit thicker at about 1.5 inches when it was done, so I ended up measuring about 2.5 inches from this line. From the opposite side that we have drawn this sleeve hole and down the bottom, we are then going to measure up 3 inches. Pop a dot there, and then we will draw a line from that dot to the opposing corner and cut this section off. This is just going to help create a bit of an angle from our bust down to our waist and just give a nicer silhouette when it finishes. Trim off that angle and then trim out the armhole. Then for the center chest angle, we're going to measure up 1 inch from this newly cut point and pop a dot there, and then we need to draw a bit of a curved line that goes up to the top of the shoulder to this new center chest point area. To create a nice silhouette around our chest, ideally go straight down from the strap and then kind of curve towards the center dot. Once you've got that penciled out, then you can trim that off. We can then use this first piece as a template to create the rest of them. We will then need to cut out 3 more pieces, so all up we have 4 pieces, and these will all end up being the back sides, and that is because I'm going to be adding facing. This I find just creates a nice cleaner finish. Also means that you don't have any sewing lines from the hems. Just make sure this first one that you lay down good sides facing, and then unfold them and lay them both down good sides facing onto the material. Therefore we should have two mirroring why can't I say that word? Two mirroring pieces. You get what I mean. That means we have all of our top back panels ready. Now for the front pieces, this style of dress has a gathered bust area. To create this, we need to allow for more material within this area to obviously gather up. So when it comes time to replicating this piece, again lay it down so the good sides are facing. Just note this moving forward, where the two pieces meet at the center has the smaller height on the edge, whereas the side seam has the taller height. So the one with the smaller height, we are going to measure in 2 inches and then measure 2 inches off there. We are then just going to grab our fabric chalk and create like a little hill around this point. By doing that, it just means, again, enough extra space that we can create a bit of a gathered bust. And then everything else is essentially the same. So you can trim this all out and again go around and replicate it so that you have 2 pairs that mirror each other. You know, obviously with cutting on the bias, there is like awkward little angles left behind, and you know, this can create waste because they're not really big enough to create other garments. So I tried to utilize these pieces to cut out these top panels because they seem to be a perfect fit on there. there. And now it's time to start joining these top panels. So lay out all of your front style panels so the good sides are facing up, and lay the matched panels next to each other as well. And then do the same for the back panels, and while you're doing this, just align the top of the straps for the pieces that would naturally match. So that kind of like oval hole in the middle would end up being where our neck fits. You end up laying the good sides of the fabric of each matching back and front panel. Obviously they're going to look a little bit different because one of them has that extra bit added for the gathering effect and the back ones don't. If you have those side edges all matching and the top of the shoulder matching and they are facing good sides, then that is all good. Align these, and then we will just be sewing across that top shoulder section. Do that for all of the matching panels. So we should end up with 4 joined together. We'll then lay them down and the good sides are facing up on one of the pairs, and then for the other pair that we have created, we will then lay these down so that they are facing good sides onto their matching panels. And now this is where they will need to be exactly matching each other. So you would be laying the 2 front panels on each other and the 2 back panels on each other. Once you've got that aligned, pin it in place so it doesn't shuffle around, and then we are going to be sewing along those curved edges. So those center neckline areas and the curved armhole area. If for some reason they are different sizes, this is where you can trim them down so they are perfectly matching, and then just go around and sew those lines in place. From here you can push the good sides out, and then you can throw it over your shoulder and just double check that everything is looking how you want it to. So the thickness of the straps is looking okay. When you hold it over your front section, it is, you know, sitting in an area that feels comfortable to cover your chest area and also sit under your arm. It's not going too far over your shoulder, just little things like that. This is kind of the final stage where you can make changes like this. So if you do find that anything does need updating, you can flip it so the good sides are back facing each other and sew any adjustments here. Then once you're happy with that, trim off any excess seam allowance. You can then go around and overlock or zigzag stitch to prevent these edges from fraying. Focus on one of the joined panels. I feel like this is one of those things that is kind of like verbally hard to explain, but you seeing it might make a little bit more sense. And those 2 longer edges which I mentioned were going to be the side seams. We're going to fold them towards each other so that they are good sides facing. Align where the seam is first, pin that in place, and then just pin across the rest of the area, and we'll end up sewing one line joining these 2 edges together. And then we'll repeat this on the other panel. So again, kind of like fold it towards each other so those longer side seams are facing good sides. Align the seam at the center and then pin across from there. Sew this in place, and then you will notice that we kind of have like a weird little singular like vest armhole things happening. Next we're going to kind of repeat that same step but joining the center seams. This is where we need to make sure that we are joining the 2 front panels and the 2 back panels. So once you've figured out what is what, lay that little mini center section so that it's good sides facing. Again, align that seam and then pin from there. Once it is pinned in place, this might be a good time to just try it on. Make sure that the front center dip isn't too much, or it is kind of all sitting how you'd like it to. Again, just remember that the front panel might be a little bit larger than the back panel because we will end up gathering it in. Once you're happy with that, we will then sew those center sections together. We essentially have a mini little crop top. Next, we are up to joining the top and the bottom panels to finally form a dress. So just like we created that angle on the top panel, we are now going to replicate that angle on the bottom panel. Fold the panel in half. I ended up just doing both of mine at the same time, but obviously you can do them together, separate, whatever you prefer. From the side edges, we are going to measure down 3 inches. Draw a line up to the top of the center fold. You can then trim this angle out and unfold it, and you'll see that it kind of creates a bit of like an arrow pointy effect. Then we're simply just going to lay these 2 panels good sides facing and sew down the side seams. Now this is where you might want to think about if you want to add a side split. Here's a little example of how mine turned out. Figure out how large you would like your side split to be and then pop a pin in this place, and then we will be sewing from the top down to this point. It's probably easier to create a side split if you are making a longer dress. Make sure to maintain at least a 1/2 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance as you sew, just because that will allow us to create a hem later on. You know, we're going to think out for our future selves. At this point, maybe just throw this skirt on just to make sure that it is fitting okay around your waist/bust area. Keep in mind this is a slip dress, so it does need to slip over the top of us when we put it on. I did end up taking my skirt in just a little bit up at the waist area. We have our bottom panel ready to go, we have our top panel ready to go, but you will see they are different sizes, so we obviously need to gather in that top section now to match it to the width of the bottom. Personally, I find it easier to do each of these sections separately, so on each of these panels I sew one line pretty much as close as I can to that bottom edge, which I will then gather up. If you haven't gathered before, make sure that you do not backstitch at the beginning or the end, and to help you, you might want to loosen the tension and widen the length of each stitch. So once you've sewn a line that goes across the bottom of each of these panels, making sure not to backstitch on either end, you will notice that there are 2 threads at the beginning of where we sewed, and we will just grab one of them and begin to pull shuffle the material over the top of this thread. As you do this, you can see that it begins to reduce in width and begins to match the bottom panel more. You can literally just lay this up against the skirt panel to make sure that you kind of get it roughly to where you want it to be, so it is all nice and matching. You're going to find that the front panel is going to have much more of a gathered effect. Ideally, I would recommend try and push all the gathering as close as you can to the center section, because that is where we want it to puff out more. Maybe like offset the gathering 1 inch from the center and then gather it for about 3 to 4 inches, depending how much of a bust area you need to cover, and then the rest of it you can kind of leave as is, because you don't want it too gathered around the edge. It'll just create a bit too much of a puffy look. I did end up having to gather the back sections just a little bit to help it match. I just kind of spread it evenly across the whole section, and it's not much gathering, as you can see. We'll then make sure that we have the skirt good sides facing out. Flip the garment so it is good sides facing of the top to good sides of the skirt. Now you might notice that the top is kind of like reversible at this point. There's not really a good or a bad side unless you did your facing with a different material. So just make sure if you have a particular side that you want to show, that you have the good sides laying down onto the good sides of the skirt. Now ideally we want to align the point of the skirt to the center seam of the top, so personally I pin that in place first, and then I pin the side seams to match as well. If I have those 2 key places pinned in place, then I can make any changes to the gathering to help it match the section that we'll be joining it onto. Once that is looking all aligned, you can then pop some more pins in there to hold it in place. And once you've got that all looking good, you can then sew a line entirely around this whole area, or if you're like me and you're a bit pedantic about having the gathering spread nice and evenly, you can do it in sections. I started at the side seam and worked my way towards the center of the front sections, just so I could make sure when I did get to the gathered section it was like nice and even, and I could make any adjustments if need be. Then for the back area I just did it all in one go because that was much simpler. If you do that method of doing it in separate sections, just make sure that you do start and stop at the same area so there's not weird gaps along this seam that we are sewing. You can double check that it is looking how you want it to, and then once it is, you can then go back and trim off any excess seam allowance, zigzag stitch these edges to prevent it from fraying, and then we are essentially up to the last step. We're going to create a double hem around the whole entire bottom section of this dress. Before moving on, maybe just do one last try on, make any adjustments to the length so you get it to where you want it to be. Keep in mind we will be doing a double hem. If you didn't end up adding side splits in your dress, this is going to be super easy for you. You literally just create a double fold entirely around this bottom section of your dress and sew it in place. Whereas if you did the split like me, you'll see we'll just need to do the double fold, but it will need to go up the side split sections. Mine ended up being about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter for each of my folds. Now, because we have cut this skirt section on the bias, you will find that folding this might be a bit annoying and it might look a little bit messy and bunched up, and because it doesn't want to fold how we want it to. If you do find that it is moving a lot and really annoying you, you can grab an iron and iron this down flat, so when you do go to sew it, it is a bit more friendlier to us. Jump on the sewing machine and sew entirely around this bottom section. If you did do the side splits, we will need to do a bit of corner turnings. When you do get to a corner, just pop your pin in, lift your foot, turn the fabric, and then put your foot back down and continue sewing. If you're not confident doing that, you can do it in sections. This last step is optional. If you're someone who prefers a tighter fit for dresses like this, or at least something that just hugs your waist a bit more, we can add some straps into the waist area. So to do this, we're going to cut out 2 rectangles, which are at least our full waist circumference for the length, and then the width at 1.5 inches. So cut out 2 panels at these dimensions, and then we're going to fold them so the good sides are facing. We'll then sew down 1 short edge, 1 long edge, and leave the other edge open. If you find there's quite a bit of seam allowance there, trim off any excess. We'll then grab a paintbrush or something long and thin that we can use to push this good sides out, pop it on the closed end and begin to shuffle the material around so that we can push this edge through until it reaches out the other side. We're just going to insert these into the side seams, so locate where you would roughly like it to sit, and then we'll grab our unpicker and unpick a section that is about the height of this strap. Once you've got that open, we'll then just push the raw edge of the strap through. It will then get hidden within the seams. Once that is placed where you want it to be, we'll then flip the garment inside out so that we are focusing back on this side seam, and make sure to do a back stitch that goes over the side seam thread so it doesn't unravel more, and then sew entirely over the strap past that section and then back over the side seam thread and doing a back stitch just to make sure that it doesn't keep unraveling. Repeat that on the other side, and then my friends, that means we have a beautiful new dress to add to our wardrobe. Well, I hope you enjoyed following along watching this dress come to life. I had so much fun making the both of these, and as I mentioned earlier, I cannot wait to style them up for their different purposes and vibes. As always, if you do follow along, I would love to see your outcomes. Don't forget to tag me at the Essentials Club on Instagram. I hope it all made sense. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe, as I've got plenty more videos like this in the works. Wherever you are, I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you guys in the upcoming videos.